folks, Ariel over here. Today I am doing a little video about our composting toilet, which is right there in the corner. Now if you've been following the channel for any length of time, you know I've used the composting toilet. There's a very wet burley. It's kind of snow raining outside right now. Yeah, you're kind of soggy, you know that? You are. I've been using a composting toilet for quite a few years now, over a decade. First in the tiny house, and now where we're camping here in the shop, and eventually it will be in our permanent house, hopefully, that we're building as well. I have quite a few detailed videos on the one that is in the tiny house. That's the one I have used for the most total years, and I have a lot of details on how it works, how emptying it works, how the actual composting breaks down, using the compost out of it, keeping earthworms in it, all of that. I'll link down below, I think, if I remember, to the playlist of toilet stuff, if that interests you. The one that is in the tiny house is a Nature's Head. It's a commercially manufactured one. I was very happy with it all the years I used it in there. I was a little nervous when I first went with a composting toilet in the tiny house because this was something totally new to me. I'd never used something like that, and it worked out great. Now, a Nature's Head, while a good product, is certainly a bit of an expensive product, and the prices have not gone down over the years. And since, I have also used a lot of bucket toilets. Now that I'm comfortable with the concept, which happened like 1 week after, first using one, I'm also very comfortable with using a bucket version. In hindsight, I probably wouldn't have bothered spending the money for the Nature's Head because I think a bucket one works equally well. They both have, like most things, they both have some pros and some cons to the exact setup, but they both work. The bucket one, of course, has a major pro that you can often find a free 5-gallon bucket that somebody's discarding. Often restaurants and stuff will have them left over from food, or at the most you gotta go to the hardware store and buy a bucket for $5, $10, something like that. So at the most you're going to spend a few bucks making one of these versus over $1,000 to buy a Nature's Head. The last I checked the price, which has been a while, so I'm not sure what it is right now, but last I knew it was something in that range. And this setup works equally well. So Clay and I both use, as my husband, we both use this setup as well as anybody who comes over here to our house. Where we are in is the corner here that's our current temporary bathroom, laundry room, etc. in the shop. So if you're seeing like this handle right here, I'm actually doing laundry here at the moment. I've got a load soaking and agitating that's in our hand washer, and the handle pops into the camera view if you're wondering what that is. Anyway, this works very well. This little box Clay had built several years ago. This thing has lived in several locations. It was in another part of the shop. It was outside in the woods before we had the shop building as just a outhouse that the only privacy was the trees around it in the summer. Didn't have an outhouse. It was just this box sitting on the ground. Anyway, so it's moved around. It's totally mobile. That's very convenient. Even if you don't want to use a composting toilet your entire life, like I do, that could be a very good temporary solution if you're building things or remodeling something, or and have a temporary no toilet access of a flushing kind. Anyway, we'll probably build a slightly fancier one in our house. By fancier, I mean like a nicer box around it, because everything else will be the same. So this was made with, I believe I got the lid at the toilet seat part at Habitat Restore, and I think spent $5 for it. I'm not sure what the plywood cost. Clay had a lot of plywood scraps, so he made the box, and it's got a bucket inside it. So here is how this works. If you come over to our toilet, you open a lid, you sit down, do your business, just like any toilet you have ever done in your life, except then when you are done, you put everything in there, to be clear, urine, human manure, poop, toilet paper, any of that stuff in there. Instead of hitting flush, we have this very handy, the camera probably actually can't quite see it, very handy reused cat litter bucket that I spray painted black. And the black is now chipping off, so I should re-spray paint it. This is full of sawdust, which has a handy little free reused, plastic scoop in there. We are able to get sawdust from a local cabinet manufacturer. And so this bucket is just a handy, you could use all kinds of containers. That's a handy one that fits right there. So instead of flushing with water when you're done with your business, you cover it with a scoop of sawdust. If you've got a particularly big amount of business, you do 2 scoops of sawdust. Whatever it takes to cover your most recent deposit to the toilet. Sawdust is excellent for this. You can use multiple other things like coconut coir, shredded leaves, larger wood chips. However, the larger the size of the thing you're using, the more volume you'll have to use. Sawdust is really great because it's so fine. It kind of covers and seals things well, because basically what you're doing is a deep litter system, if you're familiar with that from livestock, for humans, or a little bit like a cat litter box. You're putting something in, you're covering it up, and there is no smell. We've had quite a few guests over to our house. There's no smell. People use it. Now, one big pro that I see of this, in addition to the price, the second big pro of this over the Nature's Head is it's kind of dummy proof. You open that lid, it's just an open bucket. You do whatever you're going to do, you cover it up. There is no separation of the urine and solids, which has its own benefits, but you don't have to keep track of, is the urine bucket getting full? Do I need to remember to empty it? Because you can kind of visually see how full is your bucket getting as it comes up every time you open the lid. All you're looking at is a pile of sawdust on the surface. It's not gross or nasty or anything. And you don't have to remember, the Nature's Head has like a flapper valve that you leave. This is not difficult, to be clear, but you leave it closed if you're peeing. That helps divert the urine on the Nature's Head. If you're pooping, you open that valve. It's like a little, or the, handle, it's like a little trap door. It allows the poop to fall down in. I have had a couple times where a guest who is not familiar with using a composting toilet, despite having those instructions, forgot to open the flap, and then you have poop that lands on top of it instead of down in the container where it belongs, and that is a little bit of a mess to clean up. So this, you can't do anything like that as long as you pick up the lid before you sit down to do your business, which most people are familiar with doing. You can't possibly mess that up. So it's a little bit more dummy proof. Now, it doesn't separate the urine. There are ways to make a urine diverter, and maybe we'll do one of those at some point, because there are some things I like having the pure urine to use for fertilizing our flower beds and veggies and all that stuff. But it also breaks down really well with the urine mixed with the poop. Now, as far as emptying, you do empty this considerably more often. That would be a downside to the bucket over the way I was using the Nature's Head. And to be clear, the way I was using the Nature's Head is not necessarily what most people were doing. You can go back and look at the videos I have on that, on all the details, but I kept composting worms in that bucket, and where it was just me in the house, there's only so many, bowel movements you have in a day as one person. And the worms pretty well kept up with digesting it. So I only emptied it once every 3 to 4 months. That part was really nice. It was a little more work to empty when I did empty it, but it was very infrequent, so that was fine. This is much more frequent because truly most composting toilet setups, the composting is not happening in the toilet. And that is true for how most people use a Nature's Head. If you don't have earthworms in it and you have more than one person using it, it's going to have the same thing where you're really not doing hardly any composting in the toilet. You're using it as a collection point. Then your composting is happening outside of it, wherever you empty things into. With this, with 2 of us using it, we empty the bucket every 2 to 3 days. It's much simpler to empty. I'll show you that in a second, but we do empty it much more frequently. What we do with that, I know of people who are, in RVs and stuff using a composting toilet that just bag it just like baby diapers and it goes in a landfill. That is something you can do. I'm thankful that we have some land here where we can actually make a much better use of it than that, because Humanure is a great thing. And if you've never read the Humanure Handbook by somebody, Jenkins, I believe is his name, it's a wonderful book. It's funny, even if you think I'm never going to poop in a bucket. I highly recommend reading it. He has a good sense of humor and a lot of useful info. So I'll try to remember to link to that down below as well. But anyway, what we do is these buckets all go into one of my pallet bins that I've got videos on making them. I use them for all kinds of composting. You just zip tie 4, pallets that we can get for free into a little square. We have one that we use just for putting Humanure in. Especially because all winter we don't really have anything else here. We have long snowy winters and there's no There's no kitchen scraps. The chickens eat all of them. There's no weeds. There's nothing else other than this through the winter. So we accumulate human manure all winter. So it is variously aged, you know, many months by the time we get done emptying buckets into just our human manure bin in the spring. Then I take that whole pile, which is now anywhere from relatively fresh to almost a year old, and in the fall, it sits through the summer, and I can mix that in the most composting material I have of other materials is in the fall, when I'm cleaning up the garden, when we don't really have many leaves around here, but that would be a thing for a lot of people, but when I've got the cabbage stalks and, you know, dead grasses and all that kind of stuff, that's when I build most of my compost pile. So I actually just layer the human manure into there with all the weeds and everything else that's going in there, and so it's already aged a good bit, and then that whole pile will sit like my compost normally does for a full year before I use it. And then we use it in the garden, around trees, and around flowers, all that kind of stuff. There's tons of gardening videos about using compost. Anyway, so that's our system that seems to be working fairly well. Now, emptying this is fairly simple. There'd be multiple ways to do this. Like I said, this box has had more than one, well, this box has been a toilet box, but it's been in more than one location. You could hinge it so the top lifts up. You could hinge something so the front lifts out. This one, the whole thing tips, which works okay in our setting here. So you just tip this. It's not terribly heavy. You pick up the bucket and go dump it. We have several buckets dedicated just to this job. So usually after dumping it, rinse it out and we let it sit outside in the sun for a couple days, immediately putting one of the other buckets that has been in that rotation of sitting outside in the sun into here to keep our bathroom going. But because we have multiple buckets in that rotation, they all get multiple days of sitting outside in the sun. And of course the sun is very disinfecting, so everything gets that rotation of getting fresh air and sunshine, and seems to work pretty well. I don't know if the camera can quite see this. You could, of course, have all kinds of toilet paper setups. Found this one at a thrift store. It happens to fit nicely in that corner, which just happens to be the way things worked sitting in this room. And so that is our toilet setup. And the whole thing is totally mobile. This may well end up back out in the woods. Like I said, it was in the woods before we had any buildings built on this property. It was our bathroom location that we had for all our bathroom needs before we even got the tiny house moved onto the place. We wouldn't be here working on projects like cleaning up all the junk that was around the property or building the fence, that kind of thing. This was our bathroom. Now it's inside. The white paint on it has chipped a bit over time. It would look a little bit shinier if I took it outside in the summer here and gave it a new fresh coat of paint, but it's still working fine. And we will do the exact same kind of setup in our house. We don't have any plans to install any kind of a septic system. We don't have any black water. We have gray water from things like laundry, dishes, etc. that we use to water plants and so on around the property, but we have no manure water. So that saves a lot of water, which is very nice because we have good access to good spring water here, but here living in the shop, we're still doing a video I need to get done on we're still basically filling a water tank and using from that exactly like I always did in the tiny house, just this one's bigger so we don't have to fill it quite so often. So this uses less water. It provides us a wonderful, valuable resource with excellent fertilizer that goes back into our property, and we can continue that cycle of life that's kind of natural, where things, get eaten, digested, and or die, and break down and make new life, and die and break down and make new life, and so on, without sending it off away to a landfill, to a septic, treatment plant, etc. I think just in urine alone, the average human adult, from what I've read, they've done studies on this, has enough nutrients that you excrete through your urine that the average human adult can fertilize somewhere between 50 to 100% of all the crops that an average adult human needs to eat in a year. So that's kind of amazing. So as we keep that cycle going, which is something I'm pretty passionate about, we can reuse everything. Every cell in my body was wants something else and will once again be something else. We can keep this cycle going where instead of using things and then disappearing them and discarding them away, we can just keep that natural cycle going, which is why the main reason I love composting toilets. So this is very simple. It's very inexpensive, especially if you can find a secondhand or, new but given to a store or garage sale or thrift store toilet seat. Make some kind of little box and have some kind of container for your sawdust. That was also a reused cat litter bucket. I just painted it black because I didn't like the ugly bright yellow and green color it was. And like I said, it needs a new coat of paint too. But anyway, that setup worked really well. This is the sole thing we use, and we plan to have a very similar composting bucket setup in our house for the long term, for the rest of our lives. So hopefully that answers some questions if you're wondering how do we poop these days, and some of the pros and cons of the more expensive Nature's Head versus the much cheaper bucket toilet setup. They both work. The pros of at least the way I was using the Nature's Head, was definitely not emptying the solids part very often. It had a con of you do have to keep an eye on the urine container, because especially in my small little bathroom there, it was easy to not notice if it was getting full, and overflowing it is a bit of a pain. You don't have that problem at all with the bucket setup. So each one's got pros and cons. I'd still happily use both. We still have the Nature's Head in the tiny house where we mostly have friends and family stay when they come to visit right now, and we have the bucket toilet in here. So hopefully that answers your questions. If you've got one about pooping in buckets and related topics that I forgot, ask it down below, and maybe we'll try to do a question and answer video on this topic later. So what do you think about pooping in buckets after having grown up with an outhouse and then used a flush toilet, now living with me?
Well, I didn't think I'd ever go back to it, but I can tell you this, the system that we have now actually is so far superior to having to go out in the middle of the night or early in the morning. And first thing we would do is grab our little foam pad and run outside when it was 15, 20 below zero. And the beauty of it is there's no more smell, regardless of what deposit is left, than you would have in a regular bathroom. Because the sawdust kills all that, and far superior to having to go outside and, a typical outhouse, which I grew up with, they were nasty, is all I can say. And I'm sure people have been to, some of these public toilets in the park and Forest Service and wherever, they're just nasty. But this is not, I mean, you have to get over the, the part of handling this and whatnot. But, I've discovered that I believe it's a better way to go. This business of dropping it into a tank, and most areas now have regulations to where you have to dump your septic tank, and then it goes to a big system, and it's all processed and whatnot, and then ultimately the water from that ends up going into our drinking water. And everything stays right on the place. It's all recycled. In my opinion, it's a great way to go, but it took me a little convincing too, because I did live quite a while with flush toilets and whatnot. But this actually does work. It works well, and not many people can really understand it, unless you try it. Most people do it out of need, right? They have no other option, but.
It's too expensive to install a septic system, or you have ground where you can't do it, or you're in a mobile something and you can't do it, or whatever.
Yeah, and everybody says to me though that you could put in a regular toilet, and say, hey, you talk to her.
We could. I don't want one.
We could, and but Ariel has shown me that this is a more natural way to deal with it, like many people did years ago. and and it works. We've been doing it now here for 3-4 years.
Yeah, I mean, we've been using it since we first set it out there in the woods, since we first bought the property. Before we did anything here, we were just working on cleaning up junk.
Yeah, so, it's not something to be afraid of, let's put it that way. And worst case scenario, I mean, a lot of people have like cabins, even if you don't want to do it in your house, if you've got like a cabin in the woods you use or whatever, it's a great option. Because it is quite sanitary, and and it allows you to take care of your business indoors, and yeah, I guess that's all I gotta say.
Yeah, I think there's something to what the Human or Handbook guy, whose name I can't think of, said, that there's two kinds of people in the world: people who poop in their drinking water and people who don't. So we're striving to be people who don't.
Yeah, and when you start talking about that and people, make that argument, especially when you come to the water and whatnot, the amount of water, that's the highest use of water any household has, is what it takes to flush your deposit down. We have, the old 5-gallon a minute toilets did a great job, and boom, away things go, and when you flush and they disappear and it's all good, and everybody was happy with that. And then they went to the 1.5s, and now they even got them less than that, and they got the little squirt around the bowl. But when you have to flush it 3, 4, 5 times just to clean out the bowl, then you actually use more than the 5 gallons when you had the big goosh that everybody likes, and the swirling, and down she goes and she's gone. But it really isn't gone, and that's the part you got to think about. It still has to be dealt with. You may not at home be the ones dealing with it, but it goes to a sewer treatment plant. Every town, every city has sewage treatment plants. That's all well and good. They've managed to make it work, and it's made, cities sanitary. But even in some of the earlier cities, they figured a way to, recycle and reuse, Hugh manure, and they were quite successful with it, but as modern times came into play and the flush toilet, it was just easy.
And to be clear, flush toilets are vastly superior than raw sewage running through streets, for sure.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
For sanitation, for health, all of that. But I don't think that makes them the best option there is out there.
But it's not for everybody, and, I know a lot of people have,
I kind of
issues.
think it should be.
I know you would. Yeah. But no, in fact, we could do it that way. We could have a flush toilet, but I've had both, and at first I was a little hesitant. Well, this is too much work, but it's just another thing you do, when you're trying to be living, with the things that you have around you all the time, rather than relying on another system. We don't have to pay for somebody to come out and pump our septic tank, for what? It just goes from there to a sewage treatment plant, but you have to move it and handle it twice, and there's people that make a living doing it. I understand that, but that doesn't make it any better. It's still a process, it still has to be broke down and whatnot, and they go through all the different filtration processes, and then ultimately it goes right back into the waterways. And some are cleaner than others, but a lot of what they're dumping back into the streams is not that great, Yeah. I don't see it ever getting turned around, but
As far as water use, it's cool because we don't flush toilets with water. We use just a little more water each per month than I think the average American household does per day. And we know what our water usage is because we manually fill our water tank, like I discussed. And so we use almost no water compared to a household with flushing toilets.
Yeah, and you could figure out, just roughly in your household, how much water you're going through. The bulk of it is in your toilet. So how many times that toilet flush? I can guarantee you, most of the time I don't care what toilet you got, you're gonna end up using about 5 gallons each time. You know, so start adding that up on, you know, how many gallons of water, you know, that's going through. Some people have meters and whatnot. We got spring water, so we don't have any of that. But, you know, the amount of water, if you're paying a water bill, it's pretty substantial. It's the number one water use is your toilet. So anyway, that's all I got.
And if you guys have ever used a composting toilet and different styles and have thoughts on it, you should tell me about it. To be clear, this is very different than, say, a pit toilet you've experienced on a hot summer afternoon in a national park or something like this. As long as every deposit is fully covered in sawdust or some similar material, there's no odor. It's not a giant open hole of septic stuff going on. So anyway, hopefully that encourages you to maybe try it. Maybe think about it being your full-time thing, though I'm sure a lot of people unfortunately aren't going to do that. But even if you're not going to do that, having it as a backup for if there are, you know, emergencies, power and water outages because of a blizzard or a hurricane or all the kinds of things that happen, and flushing toilets, if that's your only option, can be a really big deal if you've got a couple days with no power and no water. Or if you're doing something like we did when we first got to this property, starting with a place that's got nothing, and to work on projects there, you're probably sooner or later going to need to go to the bathroom. And rather than, say, renting one of those little blue porta pots or something full of chemicals, you can do something like this, even if it's not your long-term plan. So hopefully that inspires you guys with some ideas and some options, and ask questions if you got them.
Thank you everyone for watching. It means a lot, and I hope you learned something along the way.
If you know somebody else who would enjoy this as well, share it with them.